In 2021, the adult Sunday school class at Moorebank here was deciding what book they wanted to go through for their class. And some of you may remember that I suggested this book, but in case you don't, this book is Founding a Faith. It's by Thomas Gaston, a brother from the UK. And you may know of him from his previous books called Reasons and More Reasons. But this is his most recent book, and it explores the connection between faith and belief, the foundations of religious beliefs, and how someone might go from having no faith to having a faith. And it provides the basis for some of my thoughts this morning, along with some other works by various Christadelphian authors who I'll mention later. And I even got digging in old issues of the Christadelphian magazine to check some references they mentioned, and promptly got stuck reading about issues that some brothers were having where they were forced to transfer ecclesias to be involved in work of national importance, which most likely means relating to the war effort, but we can't exactly say in case one of our subscribers is secretly a German. Which of course was a big deal in 1917 when it was the First World War, but not so much nowadays. Anyway, in his introduction, Brother Gaston suggests that many people don't understand the term faith very well, and there's a lack of clarity on whether faith and belief are the same thing or different things. And he suggests that faith and belief are very related, but not specifically the same thing. Faith can be strong or weak, whereas a belief is typically something that you have or you don't have. And people talk about their faith being strengthened when they go to a conference or a camp or a Bible school, or by experiencing a natural wonder like getting away from the city pollution and looking up at the night sky. And so he defines our faith as our relationship with and our trust in God in comparison to our beliefs, which are ideas we think are true. And this distinction is important because it means that if we say we believe in God because of our faith in him, it means we trust God because of our relationship that we have with him. And without that distinction, we could be considered to be making a circular argument, which is that we believe God because we believe God, because we believe God, etc., etc. And so we can encounter situations that challenge or strengthen our faith and our belief in God, or both at the same time, or just one of them. So, how is faith expressed in the Bible? In the first verse of our reading, the chapter that's the one that people think of typically when they think about faith, Hebrews 11, the New King James Version reads that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is that we are convinced of the truth of God's existence, his power, his righteousness, and his plan for the world, and the promise that we can be part of that plan. And we go on, for by it the elders obtained a good testimony. Some other translations read, by faith our ancestors received approval, and by it, that's faith, the people of old received God's commendation. And thus follows the list of faithful people and why they're considered faithful. I'm sure that you observed in most of these examples, faith is represented in terms of the actions that it inspires. So by faith is as a result of faith, person did something. And so, for instance, Abel offers God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. Noah believes God's warning and builds the ark. Abraham leaves Ur to go to the land God promised him, and then when he gets there, he remains a nomad rather than building up a town and a city, trusting that God will give it to him at an unknown future time. And all those that had been given those promises died in the state of having faith, trusting that God still meant what he said, because aside from Abraham and Sarah having had their initial child Isaac, their promises remained largely unfulfilled. As it says, while it wasn't yet the right time, it was as if they could see the promises, the fulfillment of the promises at a distance, not here yet, but on the horizon and getting closer. Because they looked forward to that time, rather than looking back to where they'd come from or focusing on the here and now, God is pleased to be associated with them and will reward them when the right time does come. So, as I mentioned before, faith here in this chapter is often defined by action, or works, as you might say. So let's go to James chapter 2, and and we'll have a look at faith and works. All right, just go from verse 14. So, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Depart in peace, be warmed and filled," but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But some will say, "You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God. You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works, and not by faith only. Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. So it's clear then that real faith, living faith, can't exist without associated action. We've seen the actions that validate the faith of those living in Hebrews 11, but what does it mean practically speaking for us, and what sort of actions are these that validate faith? I found a list of such actions in the book Understand the Bible by Brother Tequin Morgan, another book that I was given as a Sunday school anniversary present, and it goes like this. We should focus our lives on God and his purpose and seek to be part of that purpose. We should be willing to give up things in the present if necessary so that we can focus our attention and energy on the life of the future. As we go about our lives, we should keep in mind the belief that one day we will be required to give an account of ourselves, and as a result, we should try to do the right things and try not to do the wrong things, having patience with ourselves when we fail, which we inevitably will. That seemed like a pretty good summary to me. However, when I was giving my list of faithful people earlier, you might have noticed I skipped Enoch, because I wanted to talk about him now. It says that Enoch pleased God, and I didn't find a great answer on what exactly that entailed, apart from in Genesis 5 that he walked with God, and then he was not because God took him. So please feel free to tell me later on if you have any idea exactly what he did apart from that. But it continues in verse 6 of Hebrews 11, that without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Faith is therefore a condition for being acceptable to God, not just a nice to have. To sum all that up, faith involves two basic beliefs: a belief in the existence of God, a belief that God rewards people that are willing to invest their time and effort in searching for him, and faith will also people with faith will also be doing things that validate their faith as real, not just like an academic exercise. It should be clear, therefore, that spending your time doing the right things with the wrong intentions or without those beliefs I mentioned won't get you a ticket into the kingdom. Your actions have to come from a genuine desire to please God. So from those things, and from the things that you experience as you live your life doing those things, that's how you build your relationship and your trust with God, and that's your faith. So, how can we meet the criteria for faith and build our faith today? Meeting the beliefs component, which is that God exists and rewards people who seek him in our society these days, is less about claiming that God is the only divine being or the most powerful of many, as was the case for the ancients. In times such as these, you'll all be aware it's more common to deal with a lack of any religious belief in the forms of atheism or agnosticism, which is rejection of belief in God and the belief that we can't really be sure of God's existence or not, respectively. And people tend to fall on a scale based on how strongly they hold those beliefs, somewhere between the positions that we can definitely tell if God exists or there's absolutely no way we can be sure, and either when you're on the definitely tell if God exists or not, either you strongly believe that he does exist or you strongly believe that he doesn't. And on top of that, there's another scale which is more along the lines of how much you actually care about it. And in practice, that seems to be the one that really matters in how people go about their lives and interact with each other. And the general assumption is that a lack of belief should be the starting position. And to me, that's actually not really a bad thing, at least as far as it doesn't also mean assuming that it should be the conclusion. It's better to try and prove something exists than try to disprove it, with the same logic that if you are potentially accused of some kind of crime, you should be innocent until proven guilty. And the general term for this kind of thinking is skepticism, which is the idea that statements claimed as true should be tested. And skepticism might seem like a bit of a scary word, but believe it or not, it's a quality that Christadelphians have encouraged. If we believe our interpretation of the Bible is right, which we obviously do, one of the ways that we convert people is by encouraging them to doubt their existing beliefs. For example, you say to someone who believes in a personal supernatural devil, "Show me where the devil is in the Old Testament. How do you know that these verses are talking about a fallen angel? Would God really accept a rival that could cause people to sin and then be separated from him, like you say the devil does?" And you introduce this doubt, and then you provide your better explanation for what those verses mean and what we therefore think the devil is. And I'm sure you've all seen examples in popular culture as well that show people only believing in God because of ignorance or intentionally burying their head in the sand. And I find this misconception that belief is irrational to be quite frustrating. Worse, on the other side, some religious people take this on board and treat the idea that they should be able to maintain beliefs regardless of or in the face of evidence as contrary to what they should be doing. They think it's a virtue, but it doesn't have to be this way. The idea of a fundamental conflict between religious belief and rationality in general is, in fact, a recent invention only, historically speaking, as such, and it apparently originates from anti-religious sentiment in the 19th century, and in the scholarly world it's called the conflict model or the conflict thesis. If you haven't heard of that, it's fine. I hadn't until Wednesday either. Now, it has to be said, there are many aspects of our beliefs that we can't conclusively prove. And I know the usual community jargon goes something like, archaeology proves the Bible true, but it's for these reasons that I personally don't use that kind of phrase. But what I think we can say, however, is that we believe God exists, that the resurrection happened, the Bible is the inspired word of God, etc., because we have sufficient evidence to support those beliefs. And in fact, the Bible itself appeals to evidence in this manner, such as eyewitness accounts. I got an example of Jesus and Nicodemus in John 3, Acts 5, Peter and the apostles on trial, direct personal experiences like Peter preaching to Cornelius and his household in Acts 10, and verifiable historical monuments like the pillar of Rachel's tomb, like is it not there to this day in Genesis 35, and the size of Og, king of Bashan, like his extraordinarily large bed frame in Deuteronomy 3. I just got a little reference for that because it was a bit funny. Only Og, king of Bashan, remained in the remnant of the giants. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. Is it not in Rabbah of the people of Ammon? So there it is. 9 cubits is its length and 4 cubits its width, according to the standard cubit, by which the author is saying, if you don't believe me, go and measure it yourself. It's still there. And our community has a long history of faith based on evidence. I found, this is where I went digging in the Christadelphian magazine, I found some excerpts that show this. So first, in the year 2000, an article by Brother Paul Creswell on proving the resurrection of Christ. The first principle of acceptance with God is that we believe his word. Without faith it is impossible to please God. He that believeth not God hath made him a liar, because he believeth not the record that God gave of his Son. But Bible faith is not blind faith. we are given more than sufficient evidence to prove that Christ was raised from the tomb. Second, from a W. Roberts, not R. Roberts, in what used to be a regular section of the magazine called Sunday Morning at the Christadelphian Ecclesia from 1917, regarding the exiles returning from captivity in Babylon. It required a robust faith to undertake a journey of 4 months, cumbered with women and children and the valuable vessels of the temple, lying through a country infested with robbers and enemies of the Jews, without making every possible arrangement for protection. But theirs was not a blind faith. God would not be pleased with such. And thirdly, from a brother Eric Draper, a letter to the editor on fundamentalism in 1984. We rightly endeavour, as the earlier brethren did, to find the meaning behind the English words we read, and so come to the true message of God to man. This approach marks us as distinct from fundamentalists. It has, I believe, always commended itself to people of reason, who are not prepared to follow a blind faith. So this practice of following evidence to its logical conclusion led the early members of our community to many interpretations that have stood the test of time. As a matter of fact, in my research for this talk, I've read that over the last century, academic biblical scholarship has increasingly supported positions long held by our community, including on the nature of God and Christ, immortality of the soul, heaven and hell, and the atonement. Now, these things aren't front-page news, and they will take a long time to trickle down to the average Christian if they ever do, because some groups will not take on these beliefs regardless of what the academic position is, because of the society becoming more polarized, tribal, potentially anti-intellectual, these things. But it gives us a great opportunity to preach to people who are willing to engage over these doctrines, because we can say, this is the academic position. It's not the traditional position that you are espousing here. And likewise, on the secular front, you can find modern non-believing scholars that accept that they need to take pro-religious arguments seriously. Yes, rates of religious belief have declined in Western countries, but contrary to the claims made by various theorists over the past century, it is in little danger of dying out. In the book The Secular Bible, Why Non-Believers Must Take Religion Seriously, published in 2005, the author himself, not a believer, says the following: "Believing intellectuals are thriving once again. The Enlightenment critique of religion that came to maturity in the 19th century did not strike the fatal blow, the kill shot, as it were. Although staggered, theological modes of reasoning arose, dusted themselves off, focused, amended, and absorbed, and their proofs for the existence of God and the importance of belief, ritual, communities of the faithful, and so on have become increasingly rigorous and coherent. So we can be encouraged that when we have the chance to talk about our faith with non-believers, attempts to brush off our choice to believe as irrational or outdated are in fact unfounded, even to the level of proper, serious academic debate." So, I hope all of that has given you a boost in confidence in your belief in God and his purpose, and our role if we follow him. All that remains then is that we do the things that our belief inspires, and in doing so we build our faith in God, because that's what we need. We're here now then to remember our Saviour and his sacrifice as he instructed. That's one thing that we can do. And after that, this being the exhortation, I exhort you to go out with confidence in your faith as a believer, to preach the gospel, to do the right things and not the wrong things, to focus on our future hope, and by doing those things, to build your trust, your relationship with, and your faith in God.